Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. I am here with Sarah.
Hello.
And we are live on YouTube for another painting demonstration. This time we're going to be working in watercolor on watercolor paper. And this is just, I want to show you my sketchbook here where I kind of came up with the idea for this composition. And it's basically just a bunch of, I had reference photos from a bunch of different vegetables and I just kind of arranged them together. There is a printable pattern on my website and linked in the video description if you want to download that and transfer it onto your watercolor paper to make it easier, or you could sketch from the photo on my blog. It's completely up to you, the photo of this on my blog. I also have the colors that we're going to be using listed in the video description. I did change it earlier this morning. I don't know how, if anybody got in there like yesterday and copied stuff down because I had it up kind of early. So I want to use my Turner paints, and so instead of using mauve, which is a beautiful color, Winsor & Newton makes a really pretty one, I'm using PV19 Rose Red instead of mauve because I can mix that with the Prussian blue and have that mauve color, but then I also have the option of a really bright red. These Turner paints can be found at our sponsor, jerrysartorama.com. I'll also be using paintbrushes from both the Mimic Squirrel and Mimic Kolinsky lines, and those are beautiful synthetic brushes. No animals are harmed in the making of them, and they perform like the real deal. If you have any questions or you have any comments that you want Sarah to ask me, then you can type the word question in all caps in the chat if you're watching live here, and Sarah will relay them to me, or the moderators can help you out. And if you're watching the replay, just leave a comment down below if you have a question that that comes along as we're painting, and I will get to it as soon as I can. Did I get everything?
I think you did.
All right, we're going to start with some clear water, and I'm using a number 12 round, and this is the Mimic Kolinsky. You can use either type of brush, and you don't have to use one this big if you don't want to. But basically, what I'm going to do here is wet the background around my vegetables. So we're going to get these shadows in right off the bat. Sometimes I feel like if you wait too long, if you wait to the end of your painting to do your shadows, then they seem kind of just that like not natural. So getting them in at first really helps, I think, set the tone of your painting and helps you get your values and your lighting right. And your paint's only going to go where your paper's wet. So by just wetting the areas you want your paint to flow, it'll keep it very easy to control. And what I like to do, I'm working on a cotton paper, wetting it, and then mixing with my paint, and then going in and re-wetting the area where I'm going to put the paint. That helps. It gives the paper time to absorb the water, and so then it will be much more uniform. So it will absorb it, then you'll wet it again to give it you that kind of water on the surface, and then you have plenty of working time blending your shadows and getting them where you want them to go. So that's a little tip. It even works with the cheaper papers, like if you're using a wood pulp paper for practice, it will help because wood pulp papers dry very unevenly when you're doing like a wet into wet technique, so it will just help you get a little more control with that. I think I'm only going to go up to about here because I don't think I would have too much shadow back there, but that's all a closed area so I can re-wet. I'm not going to have any hard edges. Okay, I think I've got that wet. Now we're going to mix up gray. I'm going to go with my burnt sienna. I have lopsided magnet. I got to put another. That's where I had this weird magnet sitting on my palette, and I think it was stuck to the bottom of the I'm like, why is this thing wiggling around so much? There we go. I just put my paints into pans and then put magnets on the bottom so I can just pull the ones I need for a painting out here so it's not too distracting and I don't grab the wrong color by mistake. So I'm going to grab a little Prussian blue into there, into that burnt sienna. And it's going to give us kind of a greenish gray. You can really see the green undertone there. So then we're going to add a little bit of crimson to that to counteract the green, because red and green are opposites. And then we're going to end up with a pretty neutral gray. Maybe a little bit more blue to cool it down. And there we go. Now my paper actually still looks pretty shiny, so I don't think I need to go in with another layer of water, but if you do, go right ahead. And if you feel like using a smaller brush, go for it. I'm working on a 9x12 watercolor block, so that's a pretty good size paper. I'm gonna stick with the with the number 12. And it's pretty much a white background other than the shadows that we're putting in. So we're not gonna, it's gonna be a pretty, we're not gonna spend too much time on the background. How is the chat going? Do we have many friends with us today?
We have 237 watching.
Nice.
And no thumbs down yet.
What?
I
wow.
know.
And I scheduled this last night. I can't believe the psychic thumbs downers haven't been in yet. Wow, I've got some good vibes, I guess, with this one. People like their veggies.
That must be it.
Yep. Oh, I forgot to put the little garlic clove there. I'm going to see if I can just sketch it in really quick. Oh, I didn't put it on my pattern either. Sorry, guys. I gypped you a garlic clove. You can sketch one in if you want to. I like that little garlic clove.
I feel like it's a fairly basic shape that even I could sketch in if I wanted.
Yes, it's like a semicircle. Of course, it's going to be a little bit wet where that garlic clove is, so I'm going to end up probably with a little bit of color bleeding, but
it's all right. Fine. It's a older garlic clove.
Yeah,
it's hanging around for a while.
A little moldy. That's a discolored
so you
garlic.
Chop off the moldy part and cook it in some sauce or something. Nobody will know.
That's true. I don't think they do. Typically don't get too moldy. They'll sprout though if they're kind of old. They'll start to grow like sprouts in the fridge. Like they'll get like a little bit of green spike.
Oh yeah, I found one. I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. Open it up. I'm like, guess I better use that. We're having garlic and whatever I'm cooking.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it goes with everything.
Yes, it does. There, I just blot that out. And don't worry if you get some blooms. I actually think it's kind of pretty, especially when we're, doing a fairly simple, background. I think having some blooms and whatnot just kind of gives it a nice, interesting texture to it. And I also like seeing some of the colors separate as they fade out, as they like some of the color. Prussian blue granulates a little bit, so is burnt sienna. So you get some interesting colors as they granulate. I'm going to re-wet this area a little bit because my paper is starting to dry out in this dry winter air. Now, a mark of a good brush is a brush that's big but will also come to a fine point. So you can kind of see how investing in a good larger brush can save you a lot of money on smaller brushes, because if it comes to a nice point, you don't need to purchase those smaller brushes too. Your bigger brushes will do the trick. I found a new sketchbook. It came in my Smart Art box last month. And it was a colored pencil box, but I just felt the paper and I thought, gee, I bet that'd be good for watercolor, and it is fantastic. It's a Fabriano, and I've never heard of this line before. It's like an Italian one, but I typed it out on my blog post. I can't off the top of my head pronounce it or remember exactly what it's called, but it's really good. I should talk to Jerry, see if they'll stock it. I haven't seen it in any stores around here.
Angel T, what is meant by when a color is described as fugitive?
Fugitive means one that runs away. So the color will run away. So you'll paint it and it'll look fine, and then you'll notice over time those colors will fade on you. So if you think of a fugitive from justice, you'll remember, that color's going to run away. Just like the fugitive would run away. Colors like opera, any neon color tends to be fugitive. It's your more brighter colors. Although with the advent of quinacridone and phthalo colors, they've been able to get those nice vivid colors in a stable form. So that's why you look at the life fast ratings on your paints when you buy them. And you can avoid getting ones that are fugitive. Or if you know you're just going to be working in like a sketchbook and it's not going to get that light exposure, because that's what makes it fade, is the light exposure, then you're safe to use it. If you're going to be reproducing it, like scanning the artwork, you're going to be fine. But if you're going to hang it on the wall or it's going to go in a gallery, you'll need to have something that's a little bit more light fast.
Baru Siva, how to classify, differentiate art as loose, impressionist, abstract, modern, etc. How to do that?
Realistic. Well, there's so many different subcategories. Let's see. There's
Is it easier to Google it?
Well, it sounds like she's trying to categorize her own work, maybe.
She just said how to differentiate. So.
Oh, how to differentiate. Okay. Well, Impressionists, I would definitely look it up, but Impressionist is characterized by, instead of something being realistic, it'll have loose adaptations of the subject matter, a lot of times with, you can see the brush strokes, whereas, like, in realism, the brush strokes are blended so that they're very, they're very realistic looking. You don't see every little detail or flaw, or, everything is just so kind of blended, and it doesn't look like it's been touched by human hands, whereas Impressionism does look like it's the expression and impressions of the artists that are creating it. So it's much more of a stylistic painting, whereas realism doesn't take into account the artist's opinion as much as just reproducing the subject matter as accurately as possible. And then expressionistic would be more wild, bright colors, and much more of the attitude and the personality of the artist. So yeah, I would just Google those art terms, art movements, and see where your work falls, if that's what you're trying to determine.
Because I find, for me, seeing an image of an example of that type of painting, it sticks with me better.
Yeah.
Than.
Yeah, I would just Google art movements. There's a really good book, and this is the book I used when I used to work at the Senior Center. I don't have an art history background, and I had to teach an art history seminar once a week. And and it was a PBS show too, but there's also a book. It's a Sister Wendy series from PBS, and Sister Wendy also has the book Sister Wendy's 1000 Masterpieces. And if you want to learn art history from like a non-judgmental, really, sweet nun, she's just great, and she's not like prudish or judgmental. She's just delightful. So Sister Wendy, look her up, and her series might even be on YouTube. I don't know if PBS puts everything on YouTube, but she would definitely be worth taking a look at and learning more about your art movements that way, and your famous artists too. I'm gonna actually have my heat tool unplugged. I can't believe it. I gotta plug this in here. I know, it's crazy. There we go. Every once in a while I'll get like really nervous about appliances, and I'll unplug everything in the house. I'm just gonna dry this, and then we'll move on to the subject pieces. If anybody has any questions, now would be a great time to ask them. Got any big plans this weekend, Sarah?
No.
No?
Well, we're going to go see my brother-in-law and sister-in-law tonight because John's home.
Yep. Nice.
Have a few adult beverages with them, and that's my big plans for the weekend.
Sounds exciting.
Very exciting.
There we go.
Get some laundry. Gonna sweep the floor. Maybe shovel some snow. I don't know.
That's crazy. Who knows? Well, if we're gonna get some snow, I guess. I don't know if we're supposed to really get any snow.
I don't know. They said maybe, but they don't even really know. And maybe, and then it's rain, but who knows?
Yeah. I'm gonna mix up some mauve color, so you can use mauve from the tube if you have it. But I'm gonna use Prussian blue and rose red. It's gonna be a little bit heavier on the red, a little bit warmer of a color, not as purple as like a dioxazine violet, just kind of like a mauve, I guess. And I'm working on dry paper, and we're going to paint this turnip, I believe it is, a rutabaga. And we're not going to paint the whole thing this color, though. I'm going to be just getting this on the top, and then I'm going to be dabbing in the kind of the speckly color as it works down. And we'll be working in layers, so don't worry if yours doesn't look like the finished painting. It shouldn't yet, because we're just on layer 1. So when I get to the kind of bottom edge where the color is going to change to like an ivory, then I'm just kind of dabbing. I tried to work, keep that edge wet where I'm working as I work across, because I don't want any hard edges. A little more water in that so I can lighten it up.
Sharon Lamassney, I keep getting blooms. Do I need to add more water or pull off water?
You need to pull off water. So like what I would do is I would dry my brush off with a paper towel as dry as I can, and then I would set it where I want to soak up the puddle, and that will help eliminate your blooms. Blooms happen because you have oftentimes you've got paper that's not quite dry, and you go and put more color on top, and then it forces, you've got that new water there, it's forcing the pigment to the outside of the edge of that new water droplet, and then it's causing your bloom. And now I'm just kind of dry brushing a little bit of purple on that edge so I don't have a hard edge.
Joy Hawkins, do you paint a final glaze over watercolors to unify a finished painting?
I usually wouldn't go over the whole painting. If I do see that I have some stuff that it might be, say I'm like painting this rutabaga and it just looks very discordant when I was done, I might do a glaze over the rutabaga, but I wouldn't go over the whole painting. Okay, now I'm going to grab a little burnt sienna and a little bit of yellow ochre, and I'm just going to kind of dab in some kind of just more earthy colors here. I'm going to grab some yellow ochre on its own and do the same thing. I'm going to try to do the first layers mostly with just a big brush so that I don't have to, I can get through them pretty quickly and we don't fuss too much. I want to get that yellow on the root part as well. This what do you call it? Yeah, it's the root, right, that sucks up the stuff from the ground. And I'm going to mix a little gray, or if you have some left on your palette from the background, you could grab that. I think I might have just enough. Dab a little bit of that in there too. Alright, we're going to move over to this beet here, and this time I think I will wet the vegetable because it's pretty much all one color, so we want to get a good layer on there. And we're going to go in with a mixture of crimson and burnt sienna. Alizarin crimson and burnt sienna there. We're going to start with this. It's probably going to be a little bright. Ooh, I love watching that color just go. We'll get our base coat on here, and then we'll add a little bit of mixed purple into the edges. That will help us with developing that roundness and heaviness of the vegetable. So when I was wetting the root here, I'm careful when I do anything small like that, and I don't wet all the way to the edge. I just kind of almost give it a little bit of water, enough just to help me flow the paint when I go through there, but I don't go right up to the edge because you know, water's clear, it can be hard to see where you've gone, so that just keeps me from overdoing it and then having it spill over the edge. And just move to the tip of your brush as you get out to the tail end of the root. And now I'm going to mix up the PV19 and the PB27 and some more crimson. And we're going to get this nice deep, almost like red wine color. And we're going to do this on the edge.
Pat Kelly, do you always paint from bottom to top?
Nope. Like if I'm doing a landscape, I'll start top to bottom usually. It just depends on, you know, how I am, what I feel like tackling first. When I did this painting my sketchbook, I started with the beet. I painted the beet, and the beet looked lonely, and then I added a rutabaga, then I added the garlic. I just kept like adding to it. Without any plan in mind. That's why I think it's so great to use a sketchbook and just play and have fun and not worry about how it's going to come out, because you know you won't be so fussy. You can draw directly on the paper and not worry about, you know, ruining your good paper. Like with this, I used transfer paper and I transferred my sketch, but when I was in the sketchbook, I just, you know, just went to town, just had fun. Just I put a podcast on, and one of my favorite contemporary illustrators, James Gurney, had I don't know when he posted it on his channel, but it's for free on YouTube on his channel. I think it's just called James Gurney, and it's this mixtape called Work, and it's like this it's like a podcast before podcasts were around, and he just shared this, and it was like kind of like a conversation that he had with other artists about like just getting in the zone and working in discipline and things like that. And so I was just like totally mesmerized by that podcast and listening to it while I was painting. So, you know, have some time like that where you can just kind of play in your, you know, with your art without any expectations. I'm going to grab some yellow ochre here, add that to the center just to give it a little bit of warmth. And then what I'm going to do is use a scrape. You can use a credit card, or what works the best for this is the plastic handle. Some brushes have plastic handles, and I think I got one right here. No, I don't. I'll have one in a second. Here we go. So a lot of your watercolor brushes have these acrylic handles, and they're really good for kind of like squeeging out color. So you might get a darker color, but a lot of times you get a lighter color, and it's a nice way to kind of get some texture. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right in here, because beets have those kind of, I don't know what you call it, just some texture to it, some linear texture. And I know it can look a little scary when you do that at first, but it's going to mellow out as it dries, and then when we put our next layer on, it's going to help develop that texture. It's going to actually, we're going to have some physical texture on our paint, on our paper, but it's really going to help the visual texture as well, because every layer of paint that we put on is going to be affected by those scrapes that we put on the paper. And we're going to leave that be, we're going to let it dry, we're going to move along. This is a Royal and Langnickel Aqualon. I really also like the Aqualon and Majestic lines from Royal and Langnickel. And I love any paintbrush that's got an acrylic handle, because I have a bad habit of leaving my paintbrushes in the water. This is my second Mimic Kolinsky, not because the paintbrush was faulty or the bristles wore out. It's because I left it in the water overnight one weekend and found it Monday morning. I think it was after a live stream too.
Diane Murray, how do you decide when looking at a photo what colors to use and mix?
Well, what I do, I'll show you my swatch here on my sketchbook just so you can get an idea, because I think this is helpful. I don't want to go off topic or anything, but what I do is I will dab out my colors, and a lot of times I'll even mix them out a little bit and make sure that I can get all the colors I want from those colors that I picked, and then I tell myself no more colors. I don't add any more after that. So that's kind of how my color choices are formed. I look for a primary triad, so yellow ochre is my yellow, Prussian blue is my blue, and crimson is my red, and then so I stick to those, but then I might add a few secondary colors if I feel like there's so much mauve in here. Having either a really purpley red or having an actual mauve in here just really helps pull this piece together, because it's such a strong color in the whole composition. So I go by I just try to find my primaries that would match the best, and then add any secondaries that I think would really be beneficial. Like Sap Green is just such a wonderful convenience color that I almost always will use Sap Green. Speaking of green, I just got overpainted into the asparagus, so what I'm going to do is just dry that area right there so I don't. And it's not going to be a big deal anyway. The colors on the garlic are going to be so light, but it's just a good habit. If you paint over the edge, like you're wetting something to before you add your color, just blot it really firmly. Remove that water so your paint can't kind of sploosh out. I'm going to grab some of that beet color that I mixed because it's a really great color for this. And I'm going to add some of the purplier shadows. Garlic's really fun to paint. I bought a bunch of garlic at the Common Ground Fair once, and they were all these like cool varieties you don't see at the grocery store. And I did like colored pencil drawings of them. And it was back when I was pregnant with my first kid. And I remember just sitting on the couch sketching in colored pencils like all weekend after I did the Common Ground Fair. Because I was too big to do anything. it was like Common Ground Fair, when's that? Like September or beginning of October?
Yeah.
And I had Jackson on like October 20th.
Ugh.
Not exactly 20th. I know my kid's birthday, but I just don't want like weirdos.
You don't want to give the actual date.
Yeah. So in case my son's watching, where? Mom!
I'm so embarrassed. Let's get some kid pictures out and share them with everybody. That'll embarrass them.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the one where he's screaming, smearing diaper cream all over his bedroom walls. That was delightful. I'm like, I better take a picture because if I don't, I'm going to strangle him.
That one's got to go, when he's a senior in high school, that one's got to go in like, that was the slideshows or whatever, student night or parent night.
Yeah.
That's the one you got to share.
Yeah, that was very cute. He was very proud of himself.
He was.
It was funny because he had gone to his room. Jason and I were having dinner still. It's like, wow, I can't believe how quiet it is. Then it occurred to us that that's not normal, and I think we heard him say squishy. There's diaper cream everywhere.
And you're like, oh, lots of things can be squishy.
Oh yeah, especially where kids are concerned.
What kind of squishy are we dealing with?
Yeah, it could have been worse.
It could have been much worse. It could have been much worse.
I took a little Prussian blue and burnt sienna just to make a little gray. I'm going to add a little to the bottom here to give it a little weight. Remember, things shift a little bit lighter when they dry, especially when we have a really wet area. The wetter you wet your paper, the more you're going to get a shift as it dries with watercolor. A shift lighter. Which can be a little weird if you're accustomed to painting with acrylics, which shift a little bit darker when they dry. So it might be a little bit of a difference. You might notice that if you primarily painted with acrylics and came to watercolor. And we're not painting it all in one go. We're doing layers, so I just want to get the basics down there. If you wanted to, you can scrape in some texture on the garlic here, but I would not use a scraper handle because that's too blunt and it's going to give you really wide lines. You want to use like a cut up gift card and just do tiny, delicate, dainty little scrapes if you want to do that, especially around the neck where the skin kind of comes up and is kind of wrinkled. That's a good place to do that if you want to do some. Could do a little down here, but we're going to be painting on some veins, so if you don't feel like doing it, don't worry. It's not a big deal. It is really easy to do this though. There's not too much pressure, really, really light touch. Okay, I'm not going to do the asparagus because that is right next to it and that's still wet. I think I'm going to hop over here to the radishes. And I'm just going to go ahead and give them a layer of crimson, and I am going to go ahead and wet them all together. Treat them as kind of one object for the moment, for the time being. We got our first seed catalog in the mail this week. And
did you?
It's so nice to see it, because then, you get your grand plans. Gonna plant some things. I'm not gonna plant some things.
I know. I was gonna say you. No. Jason will plant some things.
Yeah, probably. I like to benefit from the vegetables planted, but actually tending to them is not my cup of tea. My sister always does a wonderful garden. She loves it though. She'll be out there as soon as she gets home from work. And
Yep. Some people do.
Does it for fun. My mother always liked to garden. My dad hated it. I think because he was brought up on a farm. And I really don't like dealing with like worms and bugs and stuff.
Well, that's why container gardening would be better for you, because there's not worms and bugs. Unless you add them in yourself.
Ah. pretty color. Oh, the crimson, alizarin crimson tubes are special. Like buy it, try it at Jerry's right now. They're I think it's like a 15 milliliter tube of the Turner crimson is like $2.25. So it's a crazy deal if you've been curious about trying these paints. That's a great one to try because you can, you know, try a color you're going to use a lot and get it cheap. You see, oh, you probably couldn't see that. I could just see part, like the edge starting to dry on me there, so I painted right over it so I didn't end up with blooms, because I wouldn't want a bloom right there on the flesh of the radish, because then it would take away the smooth texture. So just if you do see your paint start to dry unevenly, just go right over it, give it another coat, integrate it in the other wet paint. And now the radish stems get lighter as they go down the root. So what I'm going to do is just clean my brush off, blot it, and then I'm just going to drag the color down so it will fade and get a little bit lighter. I'm going to clean my brush again because I got more color there than I needed. And then just let it kind of fade out. All right, I'm going to move up to this. Actually, I think I'm going to dry these two because I don't want to, actually, let's go up and get these radish greens up here. We can do that. That's not going to bother anything else. I'm just going to go right in with Sap Green, not even wetting it.
This picture that you took from several different photos, right?
Yeah.
You kind of put your own. So we've had a couple of people ask about the original image.
There isn't one. It's a bunch of different photos. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, but the great thing about that, though, you're seeing kind of how the composition goes together. So if you want to go, if you've got photographs you've taken in your garden, or you've got some seed catalogs, heck, you know, that's a great source for inspiration. You can, or you could go online and, you know, you could pick the garlic you like best, or the beet you like best, or a totally different vegetable. If, you know, you don't care for asparagus, you don't have to put them in. You can do something completely different. I'm leaving some white of the paper here so I get a little bit of a sparkle. I am going to throw in a little bit of shadow while it's still wet. And if I get blooms here, so that's kind of puddly. If I get blooms, that's going to look really great in these curly leaves. So I want to leave puddles.
Pokey, are these Turner paint colors for this project in a set?
Yes, they are in the set of 24 that has the 15 milliliter tubes. I'm just gonna, let me think here. Are these, if you get the Try Me 18 set, which is it's a great deal, you won't end up with the rose red or the crimson. And I'm not 100% sure if there's a Prussian blue. I know there's at least a phthalo. I'm not sure if there's a Prussian as well, because those colors are fairly similar. But you could substitute the phthalo. Just that the phthalo is really strong and a little cleaner and doesn't granulate, so it will be a little bit different. But you definitely could substitute that. But you would need some stronger reds, because strong, cool reds, because the reds that come in the Try Me set, that's like under $30. That one wouldn't have like a strong cool red. So what you could do is get that cheaper Try Me set and get that tube of alizarin crimson that they have on the special, and then you can because the set of 24 15 milliliter tubes those are huge tubes. They're going to last you for years and years, but it's a more pricey set. And if you're not sure, you know, you just want to try it to see if you like them, then that's kind of an expensive way to go. I think I'm gonna get this. The string here around the asparagus. I'm going to mix my burnt sienna and my yellow ochre, and I'm just going to grab a little bit of this mixed purple to kind of tone down the yellow, and I'm going to add a little blue to that. I just want kind of like a brownish gray color, nothing too dark. Remember, we're still using that big brush because this is just layer 1. And we don't want to get fussy. Well, this is a nice color. This will be good for the onion skin too. we'll let that dry while we paint the onion. And we'll just mix that color up again because that worked really well. So if you have some of that purple color left over from your beets, add some yellow ochre to it and a little burnt sienna to it. And give the onion a wash of that color. I think I'm going to wet it first so I don't get it too dark. Next week is school vacation, so I'm not sure if I'm going to do a live stream on Friday or not.
Okay.
The kids are all ready for a vacation. They've had some pretty difficult projects going on.
Oh, so you might have to
do some fun stuff. I think.
Yeah,
This
right.
is fun. This is fun, but I mean some fun family stuff.
Right.
Yeah, the kids have been, the girls have had a lot of projects in English. And for one thing, Lila had to do this pretty involved project where they had to do like something sculptural, something they had to write a song, then they had to do some food, like baking thing.
Oh my god.
And she picked out this recipe that was so difficult. It was like a German Christmas stolen or something, and it's this very elaborate tart. And the oven element blew last night when, like, right before she had to put it into bake. And it was like 10 o'clock by this time, and she needed to go to bed. I'm like, well, because I told her I'll bake it and go to bed, and I noticed the oven wasn't heating up very well. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I used the broiler. That's the only thing I could think to do is just put it on the bottom, and we put pans on the top rack, and we broiled it like at low for like an hour. I was just like, oh no, it came out fine, but I was really worried. She put so much work into it. And
right. You should have called me.
I didn't think it was it was 10 o'clock.
Last night?
Yeah.
We were home a little bit after that.
Jeez.
Because we went out and met some friends and had a couple of drinks.
Oh yeah, that would have been it. That would have been a good idea. I didn't even think of that. I was like, oh no. So I hope she gets a good grade on it. Mixing up some purple. I'm doing the Prussian blue and the rose red. Gonna add a little bit of crimson to that. We're gonna add a little bit of burnt sienna to that. And I'm gonna blunt my brush off before I add it because I've got a lot of paint in there. And that's gonna go on the edges towards the bottom to give it a little shadow and a little depth of color. And I was thinking my onion was a little too dark in my sketch, so I'm going to have it lighter. I like to use purple as a shadow for this because it's got a lot of life to it. I'm also going to grab a little bit of Sap Green. I'm going to add a little yellow ochre to it because on its own it's a little strong. And I'm going to streak some of that in. I'm going to go with like the, kind of like how they have the wrinkles in the onion skin. And then we're going to grab our credit card scraper, and we are going to let the credit card scraper do a little work for us. I want to add a little bit more color in the shadow area. And all you have to do is dab it in. If the paper's wet, it'll just kind of wick it out to where it needs to go. I was thinking about doing like a series of like small, like maybe taking 3 vegetables but each on their own, and then it'd be pretty in like a triple matte picture frame. But then when I started sketching this, I enjoyed it. So think about that too if you're thinking of something maybe to hang in your kitchen. And with this, don't worry if you scrape over some dry paper next to it. It's not going to hurt that dry paper. It's the wet paper that makes this happen. If you scraped on the dry paper, it wouldn't like mar the surface. Anytime your paper's wet, you can potentially damage it, and it will take techniques a little bit more strongly.
Joe Maskey, it looks like you've got your block up at an angle. What are you using to do that?
Oh no, it's not at an angle. Maybe my camera might be tipped a little bit. It's flat.
He just got a slant board he's excited to try to help with water pooling on flat paper.
Oh yeah. Go that. You'd probably enjoy that. Okay, I think I might add just a little bit more yellow ochre. Yeah, sometimes I'll just stick it, because I'm usually working on a block, I'll stick a roll of masking tape under it, because that's usually what I have on my table handy. Trying to overmix the colors in the onion, because the onion is it doesn't have as much going on as the other vegetables, so just by keeping some interest in the colors, it'll look a little nicer. All right. I think, let's see if our radishes are dry. I think I'm going to have to dry things a little bit here before I can go any further, so I don't get any ruffly or like kind of feathered edges. We have any other questions?
We do. Sharon Masney? Wow, that was... Ooh. When adding the shadow, how are you preventing the hard edge?
We wet the paper first. I imagine she means the shadow on the paper. We wet any of the area that was not our focal, like our vegetables. We wet that with a clean water and a brush, and then we added our shadow color to that, so wherever it bled out, it would just get a soft edge to it.
Daniel Morales, have you ever used
Quinacridone?
Gold? If so, would you use it to replace a warm yellow such as New Gamboge?
You totally could, yeah. Quinacridone gold is fairly transparent. Quinacridone colors are very bright, intense, and transparent. So it would give you a very clean, bright color, bright yellow. Warm, and a warm one too. Usually your warm yellows are very opaque. Alright, I think that's good. Okay, so let's give our asparagus a coat of Sap Green. I think I will just wet it a little bit. Just try to avoid the strings so that you don't get any paint in there. So you don't have to go right up to the edges. In fact, I wouldn't where you have so much going on here. Just kind of get the middle areas, because you can always drag the paint up to the edges with your brush. Sometimes if you wet right up to the edge, if it's really wet, the pigment will want to settle at the edges, and that's how you get those hard edges between your subjects, and it's not a very flattering look. I'm going to mix up a little puddle of the Sap Green on my palette, because I need it a little thinned out. And then we'll just go ahead and add it in there. I don't know if I'll add any other colors to this in the first wash, or if I'll wait. We'll get that color in there and see how it looks.
Danielle Grader, how do you train your eye to see the layers to paint? What can you do to improve this skill?
Practicing, because when you practice, you especially if you're in a situation where you can leave, like you get a sketchbook or something, and you can paint on it for a while and then leave it and then come back to it, and putter a little bit and leave it and come back to it. That's probably the best way, because once you give your eyes a break from your subject and you come back to it, you can kind of see what it's missing. But if you're just kind of constantly staring at it, you might be like, well, this is done. I can't think of anything else I want to do to it. But if you left it alone and you came back, you'd be able to observe some other things you like to do. So that would be my advice. Just painting. There's no substitute for painting. There's no amount of reading about painting you could do, or watching videos about painting that's going to help you as much as just painting will. Instead of dipping from my palette, I'm going into the puddles, and I'm grabbing that color and moving it. Because those puddles will be blossoms if I leave them the way they are. And I don't got no cauliflowers in this picture.
Cauliflower. Not a favorite.
Oh, I like it because you can use it in place of pasta, and it's white. And I always think nobody can tell the difference. Like if I'm making mashed potatoes, if I put like half of it cauliflower.
I just rather have the real thing once in a while. I'm not a substitute, like, make your pizza crust with cauliflower.
Yeah, I don't know
I
how
just
that
rather
goes.
eat pizza once a month and have the real thing.
Yeah. I like cauliflower, but, maybe because I'm a vegetarian, I eat tons of pasta, and I could eat pasta every day. And I like pasta, but it's just so high in calories and not very much nutrition. So, like, I will do, like, half pasta and half cauliflower and, throw it in the oven with some, sauce and stuff. And then, so I don't miss it, and I'm still getting that bulk, but I'm not getting the all the calories. And it's a cancer killer, too. It's a anti-cancer
it's a
thing.
cruciferous vegetable.
Like broccoli.
I try cauliflower every now and then. Still haven't developed a taste for it. But pasta's not a thing for me, so I don't, I have pasta in my house and I'm not like, ooh, pasta. It's not a weakness.
Yeah, it is for me. Pasta, anything starchy.
Well, now if there was a bag of Cape Cod salt and vinegar potato chips, that thing, I'm going to eat that bag of chips till it's gone, and so I can't have that stuff in the house.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to also do a wash of Sap Green on these beet leaves as well. Also, if you like granulation, if you've got a color that granulates, if you are going into a really wet wash like this, you're going to maximize your granulation possibilities. It's going to, because you've got all that water, the paint floats, and then all the pigment settles more easily, and then you get those cool granulations. And you don't need to make this even. In fact, you want it to be a little bit patchy because leaves are not uniform. We've got shadows, we've got texture. And having a little bit of randomness in this first wash is going to help us achieve that look.
I think I hear your husband.
Oh.
Or a very large cat.
Is it my husband or is it a cat? We'll know soon enough. I asked him if he was going to stop by and make a cameo. He said, I don't know if there's any demand for it. Should ask in the chat, anybody want my husband to...
I'm going to say there would probably be a large vote of yes.
I think so too. But I'm still not sure that's him or if it's the cat or the duck.
It could be a cat.
Yeah. Yeah, he has to go buy an element, find a stove element, so...
Ugh. Hopefully he can find one.
He should be able to. He's replaced it before, which is surprising for how much I don't like to cook that we've gone through 2 elements in our stove.
Well, it could be a faulty... Maybe like the last one you bought was like the 1 in 1,000 that was a little faulty.
Well, I don't know. We've had it for a few years.
I don't know. See, and then the opposite. We replaced the one in ours not long after we moved into the house, and it was the original.
Oh,
and the
yeah.
stove is, 20 years old, 15 years old, so who knows?
Yeah, we bought our stove right after we bought the house because the oven didn't work. And then that was the first one we had to replace a couple years ago. So yeah, I guess it could be. It could be a dud. All right. And we can do this little neglected cauliflower. I've got cauliflower on the brain now. This neglected garlic bulb over here. I just grab some of that mixed purple. Garlic comes in lots of different colors. I'll just grab some of this kind of wine purpley color that we had mixed. Gonna add that to the bottom and the top flat face of it. And then I'll do some yellow ochre in the middle. I'll let the colors figure out what they want to do beyond that point. love to see those colors just mixed together. Oh, so pretty. Okay, now we can start working on some next layers. I do need to do some, like these red stems, but I don't want to stop and dry that. They'll dry soon enough, and I'll just go and paint them in at that point. We can go right back to where we started here on the rutabaga. Just got to be careful next to that piece of that garlic clove. And we're going to mix up a little bit darker of a purple. We're going to do our rose red, or you can use mauve to begin, and add some Prussian to it. You will still need to add some Prussian to it if you're using the mauve, because we're going in a little bit darker this time. I'm actually going to switch to a smaller brush because we're done our initial washes. So if we go in with brushes that are too big, then we could end up with putting too much paint down than we need. Because we've done a lot of the work. We've got like probably 90% of the paint down already, so everything else is just going to be more detailed stuff. And you can see the shade that I'm getting here. It's much more intense. Just being real careful around that clove. I am leaving a little bit of a gap. I can go in and fill later. And the strokes that I'm doing, I'm kind of using the edge of my brush, and I am just kind of wiggling it around a little bit. I want that edge of the fruit to be, or vegetable to be crisp, but the interior where those strokes end up, I'm letting it like kind of scrape the texture of the paper. I want that kind of mottled look. I mean, it's a smooth, hard fruit, but it's definitely got, it's got this patchy skin color to it. And you're going to pretty much work until your brush is dry, and before you reload, then you're going to start in a different spot. So that way you end up with the kind of the darker skinned area, and then you just kind of drag it out so you get that neat texture. So right now I'm kind of like in a dry brush phase where it's just catching the texture of the paper. Now I'm out of paint. I am going to add a little bit more of that rose to my mix. You could add a little crimson to it if you're using a mauve instead. I'm going to put this over here because it's got more of a red spot. Put your color in. Do your crisp edges while you've got a lot on your brush, and then just kind of drag it around until you start running out of paint. I think I'll drop a little bit of the darker color in there because that seems really red. And then I'll pick up a little bit more of the redder color and add some of that over here to help cross-pollinate the colors. Get some root. You'll just end up building, and this is like one layer and you're building up all this texture, so it's really kind of cool. I'm going to grab some burnt sienna and a little bit of the Prussian blue and a little bit of the crimson, and that's going to make kind of like a burnt umber color, and that's going to go at the bottom over here. Bring it over to the edge of the root. And I'm going to add a little bit of water. I got that a little bit dark. I added some water into the mix and blotted my brush. I'll drag some of that up. That's still a little bit on the dark side, so I'm going to blot it. There we go. And we're going to do a little bit of that on the other side of the root. That's going to help that have a little more dimension. I'm going to grab a little water, grab a little bit of the violet color, blot my brush. Real subtle here. I'm just going to go in with some plain water and spread that a little bit. And I'm going to grab a little yellow ochre and some water, just kind of in the edge of that color that I had mixed up. And that can go kind of on the root. You can start to bring that color around. And you can also do a little bit of the, make a little gray with your burnt sienna, your Prussian blue, and that color can be added into the onto the edge as well, and into the center where you don't have very much, just to give it a little bit more interest. And I'm also going to take some of that and add it to the end of the root here. Maybe a little bit more burnt sienna. And I'm going to switch to a skinnier brush for that though. Alright, we'll let that be for now, and we'll move on to the beet. And we're going to, we could probably use some of that purple. Let's grab a little crimson. And we're going to bring in color from the edges, and that's going to help it seem a little bit more round. And so I like to add it to the edge and then drag it towards the center. And just kind of stick with those lines that you made when you were scraping. Following the contour. I just picked up a little water in my brush, and I'm just dragging that out to the center so I have a little bit of dimension there.
Amber Kleingen, is it better to keep your palette damp when storing or to have it dry out?
I would say have it dry out, because you don't want any mold or bacteria to grow. Sometimes your paints can crack and fall out if it gets too dried out, like if you're using gouache. But your general artist watercolors shouldn't. They should have enough like glycerin or honey in them to keep them moist. If you're finding that when you let your paints dry out, they do crack like that, what you can do is just go to the pharmacy or any natural food store, or many craft stores that do like sell soap making supplies will have it. Get a little bottle of glycerin and just a little like pipette or eyedropper, and just put a drop of glycerin on each of those paints that want to crack on you, and that will keep them moist enough so that they stay put and they don't like crack. Because when they crack, and if you drop your palette or it gets tipped or something, all the paint just mixes together in this paint confetti that you really can't salvage. So that way you don't have to keep your palette wet, and your paints won't mold on you, but they'll stay good till next time. That happens with student grade paints often. You can see how we're starting to build the shape a little bit. It's getting a little rounder and heavier feeling. I want a little more color in the center, but I do need to still keep it kind of lighter. I'm going in with a crimson and water so I can keep that nice robust color, but it will still stay kind of light. And there's no limit to how many layers you can add. You can look at your picture tomorrow and say, I think I want a little bit more red, or a little bit more brown, or a little bit more yellow. I'm going to grab a little bit of burnt sienna. And throw some of that in here too. That's a nice warm color too. It'll give you a nice feeling to it. And maybe a little bit more yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is a great color. It just seems to sweeten other colors. It's also got a little bit of opacity to it, so it can kind of stand its own, hold its own against other colors. If you have other colors that are just too intense, you can go over with yellow ochre and it will help mellow them out. Now we're going to move over to the garlic, and I'm going to grab some burnt sienna and a little bit of Prussian blue, and I think I'm going to switch to a smaller brush because this, my number 4 mimic squirrel is not very pointy, but my number 2 is really pointy. That's the only one in that set that's not really pointy. It's more of like an oval tipped and then a pointy tipped.
Linda McAllister, is there a kind of gesso for watercolor?
Yes, it's called Watercolor Ground, and Daniel Smith makes it, and so does Core. I haven't used the Core brand, but the Daniel Smith works really well. The thing you need to just consider when you're using it is that your colors are going to look a lot lighter on it than it would on watercolor paper. There's a huge shift between wet and dry, I've found. But the cool thing is, like, you can paint on tin, you can paint on wood, you can paint on canvas, like anything, anywhere you would paint. Like acrylics, you could paint with, if you use a watercolor ground, you can use your watercolors. I'm going to do a 2-brush technique here. I'm using my dull brush, the number 4, and that's just wet, damp with water. And the other brush, my number 2 round I'm using with the paint. So I'll go in and add the color with my number 2, and then I'm going to blend it with my number 4. Now, some people can do this all in one hand, but I need to switch between the two.
Carrie Cuddlepuss, what is the biggest difficulty going from this smaller format to the larger pieces you used to do pre-kids?
I don't really think there's anything really, I think it might be a little difficult to go smaller after you've been painting big because you find yourself running off the page all the time. But no, it's just basically you just need to have some where to put it and some time to work on it because it's going to take longer to complete a painting because there's so much more area to cover.
Sharon Lamasny, can you talk a little bit about adding layers and not having your paper break down?
Yes, yeah, and I can show you on my sketchbook where the paper started to break down on me, and I knew that I had to be done with it. If you're going to put in the time to do a painting where you're going to be putting a lot of layers in, it really is beneficial to get a better quality paper. It doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg, and I always, I know what papers I like, and I'll wait, and I'll just, always keep my eyes open, and if I see, a good deal or a bulk purchase where I'm saving quite a bit of money, then I'll buy it, even if I have some still, I'll buy it so that I have some for when that runs out. I really like Arches cold press. I like the Langton Prestige. They had a really good sale on that at Jerry's last year, and I wish I bought more. And sometimes the Arches pads go on sale, and I working on a smaller pad is actually very convenient for me because I don't have to tear down my paper. So I'll just keep my eyes open anytime I see a deal like that. And I will stock up on those papers because then you can get them for about the price of your student grade paper, and you end up with a nicer paper for less money. Because as you add layers, even if you're not being rough with the paper, you will get that pilling on a lesser grade paper because you start to break down the sizing. You start to wear the sizing out of the paper. So that would be my advice is to just kind of keep your eyes open. A lot of if you don't like to order online and you live in the United States, a lot of your big box stores have coupons, and some of them sell Arches. For instance, Michael's and AC Moore, and I don't know, Joann's doesn't. I don't know if Hobby Lobby does. Are there any more big box craft stores?
I'm sure there are some out eastern or western parts of the state, but for East Coast, those are the big ones.
Yeah, Jerry's has some physical locations, none around here though, but in big cities and stuff. So if you have a Jerry's nearby, you could go there. I always love to mention them because they've been so generous to the channel and the community. But yeah, just have a good quality paper to use for when you want to do a lot of layering. I've even done a lot of layering on the Aqua Bee paper, and that's really inexpensive. It's 6 inches by 9 inches. It comes in a pack of 50, I think, and you can either get it 140 pound or 90 pound. And I'm thinking it's under $20 even for the 140 pound. So that's a good option. I don't like it as much as Arches because it doesn't have as much sizing. Fabriano Artistico is really good too. It will handle a lot of layers. I prefer the sizing in arches better, just because I feel like I can lift back a little easier, but they're both good papers. So that would be my advice. I'll show you on my sketchbook what I mean about, and I could feel the physical texture of it. You don't really necessarily see the pilling, but like I can feel in certain parts where the paper was getting a little tired. So as soon as you start to feel that breakdown of the paper, stop, and if you need to add more layers, add dry layers like colored pencil or pastel, like a chalk pastel or pastel pencil, and that way you can complete the look you're after without damaging the tooth of the paper, or without damaging the surface of the paper. I'm going to use some yellow ochre, and I'm just with that number 2 brush, and I'm going in and I'm going to add some kind of line work. I'm just doing streaks, basically going with the shape of the cloves. So I'm going with the contour of each clove, letting the edge closest affect how my line is curving.
Bryn Friel, I started on cellulose student paper and finally switched to cotton. My technique suffered for it. Any tips to moving to high-end papers?
Just practice. You'll get used to it. Yeah, because I used to love the cellulose paper like Canson Montville, because it was, especially their cold press, which is a fairly smooth surface, surprisingly, and my paint would just slide and slip around. And I love to do open drip techniques where I'd have a lot of like blooms on purpose, and I just really enjoyed that look. So that's, definitely not a look you're going to get on the cotton paper as easily. So, I'm just practicing and seeing what the paper is going to be best for, and keeping some of that cheap cellulose paper for when you want those effects. I'm going in with a little bit more of the brighter purple color, with a little bit more red and a little bit more of the rose red in it to spark it up a little bit. I love painting garlic. It's a lot of fun. And we'll be adding some burnt sienna and making it a little bit more earthy, so don't worry if it looks a little bright to you right now. We're going to be altering that. But you can't make things brighter as easily as you can make things duller. So we want to get those bright colors in there first. And I'm just taking a little of this blue-green mix here. Get a little more blue to it. And quite a bit of water to it. We're going to add some of that in there too. It's almost like a super, super pale sagey teal color. If you get a harsh line, just wet your brush, wipe it off, and go in there and smooth things. And you can always have a paper towel handy. If you feel like you got too much paint down, you can blot. This one's gotten really wet. I should have a dry one, but I didn't grab it. And I'm going to grab a little bit of that pink color up here. I don't want to have a gap between the color of the asparagus and the garlic, so I'm just kind of pushing that color out a little bit. Now I'm going to grab some burnt sienna. Because we're putting so little paint at once, things are drying really quickly. I can keep layering and I'm still keeping a crisp line there. And I'm going to have my second brush handy for blending, so I'm just going to wet it and blot it so it will be ready to go. And that way you save time and you save that paint. Even though it's not a ton of paint on your brush, you're still saving it, and it's, saves you time because you don't have to remix. I'll add a little paint and then do a little blend.
A Voltnik, I have a really bad learning curve with my arches cold press. How do I adjust my use of water on it?
Is it compared to what? Are you coming from a different paper that is a lot different in surface? I don't know if she's used to a more heavily sized paper or less sized paper. I think it comes down to a lot of practice, and I know it can be just paper can be a little expensive, and you don't want to practice You know, you want it to be good out of the gate when you're using the good stuff, but you got to be kind to yourself because it does take a little bit of getting used to. If she does elaborate on what she means about switching between those two, let me know, and can give a little bit more of a specific answer. Here's another little puddle of burnt sienna. Ran out of it. Add a little color and then blend. I think I'll add a little bit of burnt sienna. I mean, a little of the Prussian blue color in there, just up here where it'd be a little bit shadowed because it's underneath a little flap of skin. And then I'll just soften the edges.
Rosemarie Carlson, have you used Terry Harrison Master Stroke brushes?
No, I haven't. Is that a PBS painter by any chance?
I don't know.
It's kind of ringing a bell, but I'm not 100% sure. I haven't used the brushes though.
A. Voltnik says compared to Fabriano.
Yeah, Fabriano does not have as much sizing in it, so with arches you're gonna have a lot more. Your paint is gonna move a lot more. I need to grab something dry to block that. I got tissues right here. Go. Some wayward speckles. All right, I'm gonna paint these in with red. I'm gonna use a number 8 round for that. I'm gonna use a combination of rose red and a little bit of crimson, and I'm mixing it on my palette where I have some residual other colors so it's not too vivid. I'm actually gonna turn my painting because I have a lot better control if I can pull my brush stroke a certain way. Was there another question after the Terry brushes?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, because I didn't know if I completely lost track of things. Don't be afraid to turn your work.
Daniel Morales, is it true that gouache is not as light fast as watercolor, even if it is used thicker?
Yes, it is true. Because and there's some companies that have a light fast gouache. Schminke and M. Graham, I believe, have light fast gouaches, so it's not every one, but it's generally because your pigment particles are dispersed so much with the opacifiers that each little particle of pigment's kind of out there in the world on its own with nothing to protect it except for some, precipitated chalk. And that's not doing anything against the elements in the environment, such as the sunlight and other stuff in the air, and they're just too fragile. Whereas if you have like those same pigments in an acrylic binder, acrylic paint is very strong and it's very protecting of those pigments, and so is oil. So gouache is essentially a watercolor, and the gum arabic is too dainty of a binder to really protect it against those elements. So that's why they recommend that you scan your work, and usually gouache is used by illustrators or designers where their work is needed for like ephemera or publications. So it's okay if it fades. It's going to be reproduced. Let's see here. That stem goes there. That stem goes there. Actually, no, that one goes there. That one. I'm just saying if I should have one more stem coming up. I think I'm going to put another one in there. My paper's slightly bigger than my sketch, so I kind of have to fudge it a little bit. I might end up with another big leaf up there. I'm not sure. We'll see what it looks like when it's all done. I think it's going to need another leaf back there. But that's alright. I'll deal with that later. Okay, now we're going to go over to the radishes, and we are going to go back to those two brushes, do the two brush technique again. Oops, I gotta adjust my painting. There we go. Okay, so we got our number 4, which is damp and clean, and we've got our number 2, which is going to have some rose red, crimson, and Prussian blue mixed together. Probably just grab that Prussian blue right there from that purple mix. A little more crimson. The radishes are a little bit less purpley. Maybe even a little bit of burnt sienna. And we want to make sure that the two radishes that are tucked in behind are a little bit darker. So I'm going to start by accenting that edge and also accenting right underneath the leaves where there'd be a little bit of shadow. Still feel like I want that a little bit redder. Let's go a little bit more of that rose red in there. And then I'm going to just pull some little streaky lines out from the shadow. And just make sure your edges are nice and crisp. And maybe a little bit of a darker mix for where everything's kind of touching. A little bit more Prussian blue. And I'm just going to dab that in where things are meeting, where the overlapping elements meet. There, don't really need to blend anything there, that's fine. And now we're going to go over to the other side. A little bit less shadow here because this one's not quite so recessed. And when I put my stripy streaks, I am going with the contour of the globe of the radish. So I'm going to put my color down the edge. And then as I pull it out, I'm pulling it out with a curved line towards the middle. And I can go in with my blending brush if I feel like it's a little harsh. And I can soften it. And I'm going to do the same thing from this side over here. And I can soften it. Blot that water droplet. I'm spattering on this painting, I'm not even trying. And then just down the root, just kind of wiggling on a little bit of shadow, especially where there's the top root from the other radishes going over it. And we'll blend that out with a damp brush. And then for that center one, I think I'll actually add a little water to that mix and clean my brush off. That's the blending brush in number 4. I'm going to go in with the number 2 and pick up color. I'm going to start under the leaf. I'm going to leave a little bit of light at the edge to break it away from the radish underneath. And I'm just going to pull some shadows across. And a little bit on the other side. I want this one to be lighter, so I'm not doing quite as much. If you have any awkward areas, just tap it with your blending brush and soften it. If you have any area where you feel like you want a little more color, you can sometimes just dab in the color and it will just blend out with into the wet area if it's still wet. Okay, now I can do a little garlic clove there. Clean both brushes. Grab some burnt sienna with a smaller brush. And just kind of streak, oops, make sure you don't have any beads of water on your ferrule or it will slide down and make a mess. I'm going to turn my paper again because it's a kind of an awkward angle. And there, make sure you can see that. What I'm going to do is actually throw in a lot of this color at once and then blend it all at once. And blend. And grab a little bit of that grayish mix from before that we used on the other garlic, and that was like your burnt sienna and Prussian blue. Add a little bit of that in there. And blend it. Okay, and we're gonna go to the onion. We're actually almost done. You could spend all day on this. But the tutorial's almost done. We're gonna grab some purpley color. Mix that up there. And I'm gonna go in with my smaller brush and that purpley color to begin. And I'm gonna put in my darkest darks. I find it a little easier to get that dark value in. And then I go in with my midtones and lights. I'm going to use the blending brush just to soften up some shadow areas. Add some of this to the edge over here. I want this one lighter than the original one because I felt like I hit it way too dark. And you can always go back in and add another layer if you want to later, but it's a lot harder to lighten it up if you change your mind. With a blending brush, I'm just kind of pulling around some of that color. Now I'm going to grab some burnt sienna, thin it down quite a bit. I'm actually using the number 4 brush for this. I'm just going to swipe some in there pretty boldly. And you can wet that same brush and spread it around a little bit. I wanted a wider line, so that's why I didn't go in with the that number 2 that we've been using to put our color down with. And then a little yellow ochre on a highlight area to warm things up. I think that's all I really want to do to that one because I don't want it as dark as my other one. And we'll let that dry and we'll move on to the asparagus. And we're going to mix up some Prussian blue and sap green to get our shadows. And we'll use those to paint like the little details in the heads of the asparagus. They're basically just like little triangles. You're doing like the tops of the triangles. Almost like dragon scales or fish scales. I would paint them fairly crisply. It's like you're outlining the tops of all of those little points that are on the top of each asparagus, and then we can soften things later. It's more the overall look of the asparagus we want to get at this point. And I'm looking at my sketch because I used a transfer paper to transfer my my sketch because I'm on a block and the lines were not really dark, and I've kind of lost a lot of them with my washes. I'm going to go with a bigger brush for this actually. Painting the shadows between the asparagus here. Try not to hit that string. Then that bottom part of the asparagus itself could be a little bit darker. Now I'm going to clean my brush, blot it, same one, and I'm going to soften some of those lines.
Rosemary Carlson, white gouache under glass will last longer.
Did you say white?
White gouache.
Oh, well, white's really not gonna fade. It's more the colors that, like the brighter colors, will fade to white. I mean, white you don't really have to worry about. If you're using white on like a watercolor painting, you're using white gouache on a watercolor painting, that white should be fine. It's if you mix the white with red, say to make a pink, that pink's gonna fade out to white. Hopefully that makes sense. But white on itself should be fine. I am going to add some yellow ochre to some of the points on the asparagus. I'm also going to add some to the stems. And I'm going right wet into wet here. I'm not waiting for anything to dry. This is further in the background too, so it does not need to be as detailed as the things in the foreground. I'm going to go back to the number 2 round and some purple. And I'm going to add some dabs of purple into the tips of our asparagus as well. And I'm treating them kind of like one thing. I'm not treating them like a bunch of individual stalks. You can get fussy with them if you have more time, but I just want to kind of give you the kind of the Cliff Notes version of the asparagus here. And I'm also adding some of these purple dots throughout the stalks, because anytime you have one of those little points, that's where you're going to see a little bit of purple. And then I want to have a darker version of my greens, so a little bit more sap green, a little bit of impression, and then we can go in and actually dab some of that into the heads of the asparagus. And for the person asking about impressionism, this is an impressionistic asparagus. And then we have to grab that color while we have it handy. We can come over to our beet greens here, no, a radish tops, and we can squiggle in some curly Q strokes to give them a little definition. And we can grab some bright red, go with a crimson, and put some veins. Use your brush straight up and down. Hopefully my hand won't be in the way. I'll try to hold it a little further back. You have less control though the further back you hold your brush. And you want to put some veins off of that center stalk. And you might want to use a liner brush for this. You don't want them too big because there's such a strong contrast in colors there. Sorry about the phone, guys.
Hello?
You just won $12 million. And a cruise for 2.
Yeah, we only need your social security number and a copy of your birth certificate.
Yeah.
Oh, your husband's home.
Or please give us 5 minutes for a very important survey. And I'm going to mix up a little bit darker green here, and I'm going to put some darker definition on this side of that leaf to kind of break it apart from the others. And you do the same technique on the other 2 leaves, but the string was getting a little long here, so I don't think I'm going to paint those 2 as well. But basically the same technique. You can add a little bit of yellow ochre here to like make this side a little bit brighter. But you've got that same base color underneath, so it's going to be fine. And then if you wanted to, after this dries, go in with some more, another glaze of Sap Green to bring out some individual strands of the asparagus. You can. It's just completely up to you how many layers that you want to add. Last thing we'll take a look at is that string there. I'm just going to do a really easy mix up a little bit of kind of like a gray-brown color, just something darker than what we did the string in. So I've got the burnt sienna and Prussian blue, and I'm going to add a little more blue, a little bit of red to it. Blot my brush off here. And just go in and put a little bit of detail, like get the little knot in the string, get the little lines between there. If you want, you could paint little twists of the rope, and how much room you have to work with. If you don't have a lot of room, I wouldn't go into too much detail because it's going to look really forced and fussy. And that was an afterthought. I didn't do that on my original one, but you know, just keep adding until you have it the way that you like it, until you have enough detail. Like for the shadows on this stalk here, I'll just pick up some of that violet mix, that purple mix that we made, and put some shadows on the stalks kind of in back of that one in the front. So this is our kind of like our main one that's on our main leaf. I shaded the back ones with some violet. Something else you can do is just take maybe a couple shades of colored pencil, and you can add highlights if you need to. If you feel like you've lost any definition, you don't need to do that. But if you feel like that would help your painting, you most certainly can do that. So, I mean, I think you've seen all the techniques that it takes to complete this painting. I'm going to show you the one from my sketchbook again. I have a really hard time gauging how long something's going to take, because when I do work in my sketchbook, or I'm working and I'm not recording, I'm just kind of puttering, you know, a few minutes here, a few minutes there. And I come back to it and I do some more and I leave it and I come back to it. And I feel like that's a really great way to paint, because you get to see your work objectively. And that's probably what I'm going to do with this larger painting. And probably by the end of the weekend, when it's all done, I'll share a photo on Instagram, and you can see how my second one turned out. But this is the basic layout. I did add little touches of colored pencil here when I felt that my paper was getting worn out. And the colors that I used, I'll show you here. Because I have them in a jar because I didn't know if we might need them. I've got some magenta, I've got white, I have yellow ochre, I have dahlia purple, and cream. And for like the little hairs on the root there, I don't know if you can even really see them, I used a very thin Prismacolor pencil. This is my first time using them. A couple came in a kit that I bought to review, and I don't really care for them, but I think for a situation like that where you just need a really thin, fine line, they work quite well. So, and that was just called dark brown, that color. So if you do want to add a little colored pencil afterwards, you can. This photo's on my blog if you want to go check it out. If you want to, like, you know, download it and be able to you know, work from that, that's totally fine. And of course there's a printable pattern for you to use as well. I want to thank you so much for watching. Do we have any questions before we go?
We're all caught up.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sarah, for hanging out today.
Yes.
And thank everyone who came to watch. And Probably no live stream next week because it is school vacation, and I think we'll probably be hanging out as a family. But 2 weeks from now, we'll definitely have something fun to do. All right, and please visit our sponsor, jerrysartorama.com. There's a coupon code in the video description should you need any new art supplies. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.